send a message to Patty Moore and have we got Dr. Pradita Ghosh?
I'll tell them that it's working now.
Yes. Sorry all for the technical issues.
Yeah. Hi.
So I just got a message from Patty. She thinks she's in.
Can you hear me well?
I can indeed hear you well.
Okay.
Loud and clear.
And we can also see you, Miss Christina, ma'am.
Finally.
Good afternoon, everyone.
The co-hosts.
Yeah, we did the test early morning, and none of my cameras worked. I've just set the speakers.
Okay,
So
I
Angela,
think,
you will run
think-
Dr. Gosh's.
Yes.
Angela, you've got Dr. Ghosh's, so
Yeah, yes, I have his presentation.
and I can see Patty Moore, or at least I can see that Patty Moore has joined.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to start muting people.
Oh, I see Dr. Gosh.
Is he?
Hello, Dr. Ghosh. So Patty, if you can hear us, can you turn on your camera? You have to unmute and turn yourself on.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, it's not responding very quickly. It is telling me it will not access my camera. So let me keep trying. Okay.
Okay. Did you want to just try to share your screen?
Yeah, sure. Here, wait a minute. Let's see.
There should be a button down the bottom called Share. And that looks perfect. And then so all you need to do is click your presenting slideshow button. Yeah.
We're just waiting for Nima and from KV.
So, Patty, your screen has now gone blank.
Should I flash the presentation?
Patty, can you hear us? Okay.
Patty's on mute.
That's it.
And she has her slides.
All right. So, Patty, we see the slides, but they're in presenter mode. So,
And you get, Patty, you will need to select the presenter mode window when you share.
Should we pres-
So, Patty, you might have to use the
Okay.
just this.
Professor Meenal, ma'am has joined.
Okay, thank you.
Stop shit. Now, sorry, you all. There's no option to stop sharing.
So, in the top, at the top of your screen is
That's right.
is a thing that says "Stop sharing."
There's one. Okay, a little. Did it stop?
Looks like it did.
Because
think
the screen I have has share on the upper left-hand side.
At the top
And
of
that-
at the top of your screen, it should have a thing that says "Stop sharing."
I can.
Because it's- Can you? I don't think you can cancel it.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
Angela,
Okay, Angela will share your slides, Patty. So you'll
Yeah.
just have to say,
Sure.
okay, it isn't functioning. So I think Christina. So Angelo, can you stop sharing that
Okay.
and start sharing the? I think Dr. Ghosh's slides are the first. Is that right? So
Yes.
hello all. Thank you very much for joining us for our session 9. And sorry for the technical interruptions, but that's also one of the joys of doing things online. And so welcome. Thank you for persevering. But we're all here. And so I can turn over to Christina Velez, who is an ADB consultant, but she does a lot of work on biodiversity issues in the Philippines. And if you ever want to know about what bird in the Philippines is that, it is Christina. So Christina, over to you.
hello,
Thank you.
everyone. Very nice to see you. I mean, first time to see me. I'm going to get right into it. We have 4 excellent speakers today for our panel on biodiversity regulation and forests, regulation of forests and biodiversity. We're starting with Dr. Pradipto Ghosh, who's previously Secretary of the Ministry of Environment and Forests, Government of India, and who has deep expertise and insight into forest regulation in India and internationally. After which we will go to 2 ladies from Kalpavriksha, an NGO working from Pune with expertise in biodiversity regulation. This is Nima Broom and Minal Tatpati. And then they will be followed by Patty Moore, an international environmental lawyer with 30 years of experience who has focused on building the legal basis for conserving and sustainably using biological resources. So our first speaker is Dr. Ghosh. Angela, you have his presentation.
Yes, I
Dr.
do.
Ghosh is involved in research and teaching at the interface of science, economics, philosophy, and public policy. He's currently a distinguished fellow at TERI, and concurrently a member of Task Force on Interlinking of Rivers and task forces of other bodies, including FICCI. Earlier, he was member of the Prime Minister's Council on Climate Change, Advisory Committee on G20 Matters of the Ministry of Finance, the National Security Advisory Council, the Scientific Advisory Council of the Cabinet, and the Governing Council of the Indian Council of Social Science Research. He was formerly adjunct faculty at the Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, TERI University, and a visiting fellow at Smith College in Oxford. He has also held positions of economic advisor and additional secretary to the Prime Minister, additional secretary in the Department of Economic Affairs, and senior environment specialist at ADB. He was a member of India's negotiating team at the UNFCCC climate change negotiations from 2001 to 2012. Well, it's long. Here, he is the author of a number of peer-reviewed research papers and several newspaper articles. Dr. Ghosh is a PhD in economics and policy and analysis from Carnegie Mellon University and a BTech in chemical engineering from IIT Delhi, and has received alumni achievement awards from both institutions. He's also recipient of the BPPAL Centenary Memorial Award. Apologies if I said some of those things not perfectly. Dr. Gosh? Dr. Gosh? You,
There he is. He's on, but he maybe have some issues with his connection. Or not.
no,
He just-
we should say.
No, we can't. Oh, and-
So, hello, Dr. Gosh. Is there anything in terms of a microphone, or is that plugged in?
Hello.
Right, we hear him.
I can't.
Yeah, can you hear me? Can anyone hear me now?
Yes.
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 Okay.
Thank you very much.
So this is my presentation. I'll be speaking on pleasure for me to be on this platform in this session convened by the ADB and the Jawaharlal Nehru University. And I think let me
Dr. Gosh.
Should we try to assist Dr. Gosh and go with?
Or maybe we can go with that with Athens for
So, Dr. Gosh, we can't hear you, unfortunately. Is there? We heard you before, and now, unfortunately, we can't hear anything.
Do we go to the KV presentation first?
So Dr. Gosh, we might go on to the next presentation. I'm wondering if you might be able to log out, so disconnect, and then log in again, and that might assist. Is that possible? If you can hear us?
something on that.
Yeah. So I think, Christina, it's probably better to move on to the next presentation. Okay. Sorry about that. We'll try and see what we can do.
Our next presenters are Nima Patak Broom and Minal Tatpati from KV, if I can call the NGO from Pune that's been working on biodiversity regulations. They have long experience working with indigenous communities and in involving new institutional mechanisms in protecting forests and biodiversity with the help of communities. KV was one of the NGOs which took a lead in suggesting new legislation, which eventually became the Forest Rights Act in 2006. So individually, I'll introduce them. NEMA coordinates KV's Conservation and Livelihoods program and is part of the team monitoring implementation of conservation laws and policies, in particular the Wildlife Protection Act and the Scheduled Areas and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Act 2006. Her main areas of interest is conservation governance, particularly indigenous peoples and local communities
Hello.
conserved. Hello? Oh, okay.
I'm back.
Okay. So do we,
Angelo, can you stop sharing? Thank you.
so we go ahead with Dr. Ghosh's,
Dr. Ghosh, how is your connection now? Hello, Dr. Ghosh. No, I think we're going with the second presentation.
Okay, okay.
That and then we'll try and fix this up.
Okay.
Thanks. Patty's also got some problem. Patty Moore has also got some problems with her computer as well. So try and fix that up.
It's a weird day today. NEMA has been involved with documentation, research analysis, and advocacy related to inclusive conservation governance and ICCAs in India and South Asia. She has been part of the team coordinating the National Community Forest Rights Learning and Advocacy process since 2011. She coordinates a local process of participatory conservation governance in Bhima Shankar Wildlife Sanctuary in Maharashtra. Minal has been part of KV's Conservation and Livelihood team since 2013. She has been primarily involved in research and advocacy on the Forest Rights Act, focusing on its implementation during forest clearance processes and in protected areas. She has coordinated the National Community Forest Rights Learning and Advocacy process and carried on a study to document worldviews of the Dongria Kond community in Odisha on development. She's currently involved with action research with the Raika community in Rajasthan and observes the Van Gujars in Uttarakhand. I now introduce you to Nima and Minal from KV.
Thank you very much, Christina. Can you hear us?
Yes. Yes.
For the presentation, we will not be focusing so much on laws and pollen, which you mentioned in our introduction of Kalpa, which itself what we are doing and how we get engaged with various issues. So my colleague Minal will start the presentation. Minal, you'll share your screen.
Yes. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just give me a second. It's connecting. Is it visible?
No, there's no presentation visible.
Okay. Just give me another minute. I'm trying.
So who is sharing the presentation? Sorry,
Minal is sharing it.
okay.
I can't share it for some reason. Nima, could you
Should
try?
I try? Yes.
Yes, please.
Can people see it?
Yes, but it hasn't loaded yet. Yeah,
Okay.
yes. Nima, if you can put it on slideshow mode. Yeah, great.
I did.
All right. So good afternoon to everybody. On behalf of my colleague Nima and myself, I would like to thank everybody on the organizational team and especially Dr. Nupur Chaudhary for giving us an opportunity to be part of this wonderful program. And we're very much looking forward to the discussions that will follow. Our presentation is going to be focused a little bit more about our work on forests and biodiversity and how we got involved and what are the processes that are taking place nationally and how we've been involved in trying to understand and trying to influence forests and biodiversity policy. I'd like to begin by taking you a few decades back to talk about how our own organization got involved with forest and biodiversity issues. From being a bunch of urban school going children exploring nature and biodiversity in and around Delhi. Next, Nima. And there were certain events that fundamentally changed our understanding of what conservation really means and how the concept of environmental justice applies in the Indian context. The first was our engagement with the Chipko movement, where the villagers were articulating how they use their forests and why the forests were important to them. Nima, can you click on the next? Yes. The second was an incident in the Keoladev National Park in Bharatpur, Rajasthan in 1981, where 6 people were killed in a police firing for attempting to graze their cattle inside the national park, thereby raising questions about who can access forests. And the third was the announcement of several dams being constructed on the Narmada River, kind of changes that it was going to bring about, and how this development or vikas was going to impact local people and the forests of the region.
So I think one of the most important points that happened with our engagement, because Kalpavriksha members who were very young students at that point in time actually carried out an investigation around Narmada issues. It was one of the first investigations that was carried on, and that report eventually became like a basis for many movements to be built subsequently. But what it helped us understand, our members, and which we continue to understand, that who actually decides the fate of India's natural resources and the people who are dependent on that. And we understood, and which we continue to work with, is that our decision-making process continues to be extremely centralized, deeply influenced by our colonial legacy, very, very top-down, mostly controlled by the government agencies, sometimes influenced by elitist conservationists, increasingly deeply also influenced by private sector, private corporations, judiciary playing a very important role over the years. Occasionally, in the past, a little bit more, and increasingly less and less engagement of the civil society, particularly those working on human rights issues or environmental justice issues. And what was most impactful for these young students in their early formative years, and which has remained, is that the people who lived closest to these resources and have been historically, culturally connected to these resources have absolutely no role in making any decisions about either laws and policies or practices related to them. And we also began to understand that without any necessarily basis evidence, our conservation policies and laws were based on certain assumptions. And these assumptions were that all local human uses were necessarily harmful for any local ecosystem, local people necessarily damaged the ecosystem. Relocating people from their existing territories or areas was the only way to achieve conservation objectives, and coexistence, particularly with large mammals, is absolutely impossible. There were some other assumptions that were there, that the practical local knowledge was of no use in conservation policies, and it was only the wildlife managers and forestry departments whose knowledge was important for being able to achieve conservation. Another assumption which deeply influenced us, which was that in the 5% of the area that we call protected areas, which are designated by the government agencies in India, was the only way to be able to achieve conservation. And what happens in the rest of the landscape outside of these protected areas is of nobody's concern, and it has no impact on the protected areas themselves. So we also began to realize that it was these assumptions and these kind of worldviews which were eventually leading to immense cost to the local people, and who should have been the allies to conservation actually were the strongest opposers, and there was a strong political will against conservation, not for conservation per se, but the manner in which conservation was being practiced. Many local people suffered displacement, physical and mental trauma, loss of critical sources of livelihood, alienation from the resources that they were part of. There was a very strong distrust and constant conflict with the protected area managers, the forest department in almost all protected areas. And often because of any lack of options for the local people, destructive resource use was being practiced. It also meant denial and disruption of local systems of management, sustainability. So, Meenal, you want to carry on?
Yes. So looking at these issues, our broad areas of work sort of developed from there. And we have 5 broad themes on which we work currently, conservation and livelihoods being one of our primary focuses. And through that, we also look at environment and development, laws and policies that affect both these things, looking at environment education and how it can impact local communities and help them to conserve better. Also looking at alternatives to the current paradigm of development, which is extractive on the one hand, and also seeks to protect certain areas by restricting their access to local communities.
So for Meenal and I are both engaged with the Conservation and Livelihoods program of Kalpavriksha. So this is what we would speak about here. Most our program's focus remains efforts towards democratizing the conservation policies and practice in the country, because there is a very strong belief, because of our engagement in the past with the local communities, that scheduled tribes and other local communities are central to the management, governance and conservation of natural ecosystems, and they have a long history of conservation which cannot be denied. That they're also central to defining the local development itself, which they prefer to call well-being rather than development. That their concerns, knowledge and governance systems and conservation efforts need recognition, support and visibility, and to achieve this, restoring and recognition of their access, use, management and conservation rights and responsibilities is fundamental. So how we do is we have 3 or 4 ways in which we try to impact policies and practice related to conservation to make them more democratic. We do research, documentation at 2 levels. One is to co-create or create knowledge or information about local concerns and bring them to larger public and to policymakers, but also to develop, because knowledge is a very important tool, and very often local communities lack information and knowledge, which is what puts them at a disadvantage. So to bring about policy briefs and analysis pieces which are translated into local languages and shared with local people and NGOs. But we also very strongly believe that none of this kind of work can be done by any one organization or individuals. So we largely work through networks and try to impact processes through dialogues, consultations at local, regional, international, and national levels. Amongst the various activities of our team involves tracking laws and policies, particularly trying to engage with these laws and policies at their drafting stage. For example, right now we have amendments to the Indian Forest Act and we just had amendments to our National Wildlife Action Plan, and there are proposed amendments to Wildlife Protection Act. So how do we try and bring these laws and policies to be more democratic? So towards this, amongst some of the initial work that we were engaged in was we carried out a survey of management status and impacts of several protected areas in India, which is when we realized the extreme form of conflict that existed in these areas. And to bring about a debate in the country on this extreme form of conflict, as well as to try and sort of reduce the polarization between those who believed in strong conservation and those who believed in human rights, we started a Jungle Jeevan Bachao Yatra. So this was like a journey through 16 protected areas in various parts of the country, where we try to bring people who are working on conservation issues, on local issues, and have a debate and discussion in the local context. So they see the concern people, but they also see the needs of the wildlife. We also tried to create a dialogue at the national level called the Future of Conservation Network, which was also an effort to try and bring people with very extreme views on conservation and human rights. This was particularly after the enactment of the Forest Rights Act that Meenal will be talking about shortly, which, contrary to general belief that it would create possibilities for us to democratize our conservation policies, actually created even stronger polarization, people who were for it and against it. We have also been engaged with carrying out a national strategy and action plan, which was required under the Convention on Biological Diversity, and which was acclaimed as amongst one of the best processes globally because of the number of people and organizations and institutions that were involved over a period of 2 years of discussions and debates, which unfortunately was not recognized by the government, but remains available for anyone to access. Similarly, we have also tried to create in the more recent time a national network on community forest rights, so that people who are trying to use the Act towards better conservation and forest governance will come together, learn from each other's experiences. We're also part of, in trying to bring about greater visibility to community conservation initiatives, we are also part of national and international networks on community conserved areas. So just to quickly, some of these investigations, reports, and documentation that we have done, particularly on the conflict on protected areas, we have tried to map along with, in collaboration with the Environmental Justice Atlas, which we have recently published, and we would encourage you to please look through it, which presents how this small area of 5% is ridden with conflicts, increasingly getting militarized and increasingly facing opposition from protected areas. But now that we are globally talking about 30% of the area coming under conservation, can this really be the way to go towards achieving conservation? So what we are also trying to do is document more and more examples of local communities' own efforts at conservation, and trying to give a visibility to that. After you, Nina.
Although, like Nima mentioned, the general assumptions about forest and conservation remain the same, several people's movements over access and rights to forests have started to impact policy. So from the 1980s onwards, we begin to see a change in the language of policy, and that thereby also impacting lawmaking processes in India. In 1988, we see the new forest policy of India was unveiled, which acknowledged local people's dependence on forests. Following that, in 1990, the Joint Forest Management Scheme was rolled out. It called for participation of local people in forest management and conservation. And then there were acts like the 1994 PESA Act and the 2002 amendments to the Wildlife Protection Act and the Biological Diversity Act that called for some level of co-management. But the events leading up to passing of the FRA, the Forest Rights Act, and the Act itself have fundamentally shifted forest policy in the country. So how has the Forest Rights Act shifted this? Firstly, it recognizes and vests that different types of rights over forests exist with local communities and that they are integral to the survival of forest ecosystems. This is something that the preamble of the Act states. It places the authority of conservation of forests on local communities, which has not been done before. And it places decision-making powers, ownership with local communities. And this was included in the Forest Conservation Act, where you had the principle of free and prior informed consent of local communities needed to be taken before forest clearance processes could be carried out on any forest land. Next, Nima. But ideally, how it is being implemented is very different from what the law says, and this is what we've been trying to track. First of all, we see that there are fake or non-existent Gram Sabhas and Gram Sabha meetings where villagers have discovered through RTIs that meetings have been reported to have been held on certain days, but nobody in the village has attended these meetings, or there was no record of the village panchayats, or that the meetings have been boycotted by Gram Sabhas and they have been recorded as having been taken place, or they have been held without a quorum. The other very serious violation that has happened is that district collectors have issued fake resolutions of Gram Sabhas certifying that no rights exist on the land to be diverted, despite the process of rights recognition not having started in these areas at all, or using the excuse that because claims have not been filed in these areas, no rights exist. And passing them off as resolutions of consent. The third and important for everybody present here is there are a lot of contrary circulars being passed by both the Ministry of Environment and Forests, and in counter to that by the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, which is the implementing agency of the Forest Rights Act, which sort of confuses the entire process of how forest clearance can be given and how free, prior, informed consent needs to be taken. And then we also see that several state governments and administrations have taken differing positions on whether FRA is applicable to them or no, and how this then plays out in the forest clearance process is very interesting to understand. So our work is primarily now centered towards tracking the implementation of the consent provision and disseminating this information to vulnerable communities through groups and NGOs who work with them. And what we are seeing in conclusion is that despite having such a revolutionary law on paper, very little has changed on the ground. And we actually have a very long way to go to implement these laws and see how forests and biodiversity governance issues can be changed in this country. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Nima and Minal. Professor Ghosh, are you ready? Professor Ghosh? Angela, have you been able? Okay. So Matthew, I'll proceed to Patty first.
Yeah, go with Patty first. He just logged out.
Okay. So our next speaker is Patty Moore, an environmental lawyer with more than 27 years international experience working in environmental law and governance across more than 30 countries in Africa, Asia, Europe, and Latin America. She has been living and working in Asia since 1999 and based in Bangkok since 2003. The Convention on Biological Diversity came into force in 93, and much of her work since then has focused on building the legal basis for conserving and sustainably using biological resources. In Southeast Asia, Patty has supported governments and NGOs to draft laws on biodiversity and strengthen existing laws and regulations governing ecosystems, species, and genetic resources, including Vietnam's law on biodiversity and regulations on biosafety and access to genetic resources and benefit sharing, or ABS. Decrees for Cambodia on biosafety and ABS, as well as the draft environment code and a model ABS contract and new draft decree on protected areas for Lao, PDR, among others. Patty is also currently working on environmental and social safeguards and children's rights to a healthy environment in the Asia-Pacific region, as well as the legal trade in wastes. Patty?
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Oh, good. That's such a relief. This has been exciting. Thank you, first of all, to ADB and JNU and the organizers for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here. And my presentation is going to be a big change from the one that that Nima and Minal just made, which is primarily on policy and actual practice. Because I'm actually going to look strictly just at regulation of biodiversity in Southeast Asia, and it's a little bit of comparative law, and that will actually be dealt with in depth in session 12. So maybe I hope that what I will talk about here would give the other participants some things to think about when you're talking in session 12. Okay, next slide, please. Yes, I want to thank, whether it's Angelo or Matthew, whoever's advancing my slides, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, just a quick outline of the presentation. First, we'll look at constitutional provisions, then biodiversity, laws that are just biodiversity, then other laws governing ecosystems and species, framework environmental laws, and finally, I'll conclude with a review of protected area laws under a project that's funded for the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. Next slide, please. Just as a reminder for those of you who may not have all of these countries in your head, these are the 10 members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. With the exception of Brunei, all of these countries have some level of decentralized government, but Malaysia is the only one that, like India, is a federated state. And that raises some interesting possibilities for research for grad students as well as professors, I think, that we can talk about a little bit later. Next slide, please. Okay, there are three countries, three ASEAN member states that have constitutional provisions specifically directed to biodiversity. And all of them look at protecting or conserving biodiversity. And also, as you can see, these constitutions with provisions on biodiversity are the most recent. Thailand's current constitution is the most recent of them all. Singapore's constitution has been updated this year, but it has not introduced anything on biodiversity. Next slide, please. There are, with the exception of Singapore, all of the constitutions of the ASEAN countries have at least a provision on natural resources and or the environment. So we've already talked about Lao PDR, which has a provision on biodiversity. It also has a provision on natural resources and forests. And you can see what these other four countries on this slide have. Next slide, please. Again, Thailand and Vietnam both have provisions on biodiversity. They also have similar provisions on natural resources and environment. And Myanmar and the Philippines, specifically the Constitution, specifically speak to legislative authority for natural resources. Next slide, please. Now, there are two countries that actually have laws on biodiversity. Myanmar is the one that enacted its law most recently. It's on conservation of biodiversity in protected areas. But this law does not recognize, does not regulate two of the other components, one of the genetic resource component of biodiversity. It regulates ecosystems and species, but not genetic resources. Vietnam's 2008 biodiversity law regulates both biosafety and access to genetic resources and benefit sharing, but does not regulate ecosystems and species in depth. Other laws in Vietnam do that. Cambodia has not a law, but a sub-decree that deals with one aspect of biodiversity conservation, which again is ecosystems. It's looking at corridors and connectivity. And this sub-decree also does not regulate biosafety or ABS. Thailand has a draft biosafety law that's under consultation right now. The draft is far from being finalized, as I understand it. But when that draft is actually enacted, it will regulate both biosafety and ABS. Now, there are biodiversity laws and regulations covering biosafety in 8 of the ASEAN member states. 4 of them have specific laws or regulations on biosafety, and the other 4 have a series, not just a series, multiple guidelines, some of them legally binding, some of them not, on all different aspects of biosafety, whether it's contained use or release into the environment or use for food, seed, and agriculture. So most of the ASEAN member states have regulated biosafety to some degree. Next slide, please. ABS. Fewer countries have regulated access to genetic resources and benefit sharing. The same law for Lao PDR that regulates biosafety also enables regulation of ABS. There are actually 3 articles that do that. Now, Lao PDR has had a draft decree on under this law on ABS for some time, and is in the process of trying to get that updated and adopted. In the meantime, I've worked with Lao, and we've developed a model contract for ABS because Lao has had several requests for access to its genetic resources. So they have just begun using that. It was UNCTAD that supported that, and UNCTAD has just published that model contract. So it is available online now on the UNCTAD website. You can see here Malaysia has an Access to Biological Resources and Benefit Sharing Act. And I think here, this could be a very interesting master's thesis, if one hasn't been done yet, on comparing how Malaysia and India, which are both federated states, have approached access to biological resources and benefit sharing, because even their 2 laws are focused in very much the same way. The Philippines was actually the very first country to regulate ABS at all. It did it by executive order in 1995, and then 10 years later updated that through a joint department administrative order. Singapore regulates ABS rather indirectly. There's no particular regulation or law that does it, but it's regulated through research permits. And Vietnam has, under its biodiversity law, which regulates ABS, has issued several decrees and circulars on ABS. The most recent and the most up-to-date is one that was issued 3 years ago in 2017. Next slide, please. Now, actually all of the countries in ASEAN had regulated both ecosystems and species to some degree, even before the CBD came into force. So for forests, all ASEAN member states have a forest law, except for Singapore, which has a Parks and Trees Act, which is understandable. It doesn't really have large tracts of forest. Aquatic ecosystems, both freshwater and marine, are regulated in all ASEAN member states by fishery laws. And wetlands are regulated in 6 out of the 10. So the majority of the ASEAN member states have either a decree or even a law that provides some kind of protection and regulation for wetlands. Next slide, please. Okay. And now on species, again, virtually every country has regulated species going back more than 30 years. There are some that are regulated specifically through wildlife laws and regulations. And then in other countries, such as in Cambodia, Indonesia, Myanmar, and Vietnam, there are a combination of laws that regulate wildlife. So in Cambodia, for example, it's both the law on forestry and the protected areas law that have provisions on wildlife. In Vietnam, it's both the biodiversity law and the law on forestry. So you can see that that as ASEAN member states have regulated, in some cases they have focused in, like the Philippines did with the Wildlife and Habitats Act, or even Singapore with the Wild Animals and Birds Act. And in other cases, they've spread out the coverage of wildlife, as Cambodia, Indonesia, Myanmar, Vietnam have done. Next slide, please. Now, in framework environment laws, 9 of the 10 ASEAN member states have general environment laws. The Philippines is interesting. It doesn't have one umbrella law, but it has individual laws and many regulations that govern air, water, solid waste management, hazardous materials, and environmental impact assessment, which are the kinds of issues that are generally covered under a framework environment law. One of the states has, in its environment law, has multiple provisions enabling biodiversity conservation, and that is Vietnam with its 2014 law on environmental protection. Now, that law is currently in process of being updated. I've just been working with them on specifically looking at adding provisions on biodiversity conservation and landscapes. But that law would obviously not even be debated and maybe adopted until next year, which means it could come into force in 2021 or 2022. Thailand's National Environmental Quality Act actually has several provisions on protecting ecosystems, which are in addition to the provisions in Thailand's National Parks Act. There are 4 ASEAN member countries that have environmental laws that, 3 that have general provisions on natural resources or forests, but 4 of them are completely pollution focused and have no provisions at all on biodiversity or natural resources. Next slide, please. Now that we'll turn a little bit to how ASEAN covers biodiversity. There is an ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, which is one of ASEAN's 10 specialized centers. ACV was established in 2005, and it is based in the Philippines. One of ACV's particular responsibilities for ASEAN is ASEAN Heritage Parks. The ASEAN Heritage Parks were first declared more than 35 years ago in 1984, but they have become one of the primary responsibilities of ACV. And as of this year, there are 49 ASEAN Heritage Parks, and you can see the breakdown. Vietnam has declared the most, Philippines the next most, but every country has at least one. Now, the project that is supporting the legal reviews that we're going to talk about in these next slides is called the Biodiversity Conservation and Management of Protected Areas in ASEAN Project, or BCAMP. This project is funded by the European Union. Its focus is supporting ACB in mainstreaming biodiversity into all aspects of the ASEAN Secretariat's work. And it is also funding work on ASEAN Heritage Parks, helping countries build their proposals to declare new ASEAN Heritage Parks, helping to develop the criteria for evaluating ASEAN Heritage Parks and the effectiveness of their management. And also what we're doing now is looking at how they are governed, what the legal requirements are for them. So next slide, please. Okay, the B Camp reviews of protected areas laws. There are protected areas laws, or at least a decree in all of the ASEAN member states except for Brunei and Vietnam. And Vietnam actually has its protected areas governed by the forestry law and the fisheries law. Forestry law calls protected areas special use forests, and the fisheries law governs marine protected areas. The basis for the structure of this review was IUCN's guidelines for protected areas legislation, which are really the only guidelines on protected areas law that we have actually at the international level. So you can see the kinds of issues that went into the full review of all of this. The slides that what we're going to look at in the next few slides we're not going to go through all of the different parameters for the analysis, but in next slide, please, and I'll explain what we're going to look at. Okay, the Aichi target 11, is on protected areas. Globally and in ASEAN, according to the Global Biodiversity Outlook number 5, this target has been partially met, at least in terms of the percentage of coverage. One of the targets that has 17% of terrestrial area covered and 10% of marine areas. The target elements for Aichi target 11 that remain to be met are particularly important because these really go to how sustainable protected areas are. And this would be taking our protected areas from being what we call paper parks to being actually sustainably managed protected areas. So these 4 elements of Aichi Target 11 that we're going to look at now are whether areas of particular importance for biodiversity and ecosystem services are covered, whether the protected areas are effectively and equitably managed, whether they are well connected, and whether they are ecologically representative. Okay, next slide, please. Now, the first 3 of these, whether areas of particular importance for biodiversity and ecosystem services are covered, whether they're ecologically represented, and whether they're well connected, first arises in the question of whether or not each country has a national protected area system. In 2 countries, the system is explicit. In 2 countries, it's implicit, and the other countries have not created a national system at all. The implication there is that the national system, and therefore the national system plan that would need to be created, would particularly focus on seeing whether the national system is ecologically representative, whether all of the major ecosystems in the country are represented within the national protected area system. And it would also look to be sure that areas in the country that are of particular importance, whether locally, nationally, regionally, or internationally for biodiversity, have been incorporated into the system. Without a national system and without a national system plan, that kind of information is much more likely to be scattered, and because it's diffuse, much more likely to be maybe overlooked. Payments for ecosystem services have been enabled in half of the ASEAN member states, and well connected corridors or connectivity has also been enabled in half of the member states. And it's interesting, there is an overlap in most of these, but not all of them, as I think you can see. Next slide, please. So the big remaining issue of the targets of Aichi 11 that have not been achieved yet is effective and equitable management. And one of the first issues is site planning. Now, the good news is that the laws and regulations in most ASEAN member states do require individual site planning, but in only 5 of the countries, half of them, is it required that protected areas be integrated into land use plans, and it's only implicit or partial in 2 of those countries. this is very important to be sure that when development is going ahead and when other uses for land are being examined in development plans, that protected areas are officially and formally recognized. And that's the case in it's completely the case in only 3 of the ASEAN member states. When we get into equitable management, we're looking at public participation. And there's public participation in site planning required only in 3 ASEAN member states. There is public participation in establishing protected areas in a few more, in 6 of the countries, but in Brunei, it's by objection only. Next slide, please. Also, and what's interesting is if you look at this, there's public participation when a protected area is changed or completely degazetted or disestablished in only 2 countries, Cambodia and Thailand. Nima and Mina were talking about co-management, as the evolution toward co-management in India. There are only 2 countries that really specifically enable co-management. In 2 countries, 2 ASEAN countries, it's implicit, and in Vietnam, it's enabled for marine protected areas only. Nima and Mina were also talking about community protected areas and indigenous and community conserved areas. In Cambodia, it's interesting, they're not enabled necessarily under the protected areas law, but they are possible under the land law. But 4 other ASEAN member states actually enable them. Benefit sharing, again, which is a very important part of equitable management, is specifically enabled in only 4 ASEAN member states. Next slide, please. Financing. Now, whether or not there is funding for protected area management is a key criterion in all countries. There are 5 ASEAN member states that have set up a fund or which make an existing fund available to provide some kind of support, financial support for protected areas. That most ASEAN member states allow donations, but the donations don't necessarily go directly to protected areas. In most cases, if there's a fund, they go to the fund. And in some cases, it's only generally enabled that there may be donations, but not specifically where they may be directed. One issue that has been found to be very important for protected areas, and this is worldwide, not only in ASEAN, is whether individual protected areas are allowed to retain any income they may receive from entry fees or fees for other kinds of uses, say for camping or making videos or something like that, or whether or not all of the protected area income must be returned to the national treasury. In Cambodia, that is site-specific. In Indonesia, it's possible, but not explicitly so. Myanmar, in its 2018 law, specifically says that funds will be deposited into the national treasury, but then 100% of those funds will be reallocated back to the protected areas for their support. And then 3 ASEAN member states, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, specifically allow protected areas to retain their income. All ASEAN member states except Brunei have enabled the polluter pays principle, but they have not all specifically enabled it to be used in the context of supporting protected area management. Next slide, please. Now, again, possibly the final issue in effective management would be how effective is enforcement, and are there any incentives for complying with the laws? And it's interesting, there are 3 ASEAN member states that have an incentive for, not necessarily for compliance, but it's protection for informants who report any kind of problems. All countries give administrative enforcement powers to their protected area staff, and most of the countries give police powers to their protected area staff. The next slide is the last slide. Next slide, please. So to sum up, all of the ASEAN member states had regulated either the ecosystems or species components of biodiversity or both of them prior to the Convention on Biological Diversity. All of them have amended existing laws and or adopted new ones since the CBD came into force. 5 of them have regulated both biosafety and ABS. 3 have regulated only biosafety, and all of them have partially regulated issues that are central to achieving Aichi Target 21. And that was the last slide. The last slide says thank you, and I do thank you for your time and for the opportunity to give you some comparative law issues to think about. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Patty. And now, Dr. Gosh, we're ready.
Please unmute. If
Okay, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
yes, thank you.
So, can you bring up my slides?
WhatsApp, please.
I have the slides.
Okay. So I'll be speaking on policy issues in forest and biodiversity conservation in India. And let me say that it's such a pleasure for me to be back in a forum with the Asian Development Bank. I think you may not know that I was a senior specialist at the Asian Development Bank for 7 years, from 1994 to 2001, and in the course of which I was the co-team leader with my colleague John Boyd for the first ADB RATA on environmental law. So can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, so first I'll touch upon the question of forests. And so first I'll, from a policy perspective, why are forests important? And these points are taken from the National Environment Policy of 2006. And it speaks about the role of forests in recharging of mountain aquifers which sustain our rivers. Very, very important for a peninsular agricultural country like India. Similarly, conservation of soil and prevention of floods and drought. Again, extremely important, an extremely important environmental service for India. Provision of habitat for wildlife and the ecological conditions for maintenance and natural evolution of genetic diversity of flora and fauna. Then it is also the home of traditional forest dependent communities. Now these are more than 80 million people who are dependent on the forests, either live in the forests or in the periphery of the forests, and depend on forests for their livelihoods. And this is actually larger than the entire population of many ASEAN states. And they yield timber, fuel wood, and other forest produce. Of course, some of this is meant for the forest dependent communities, but some also it goes to outside markets. And it possesses immense potential for economic benefits, in particular for local communities, from sustainable ecotourism. So next slide, please. So what is the policy understanding for the causes of forest depletion and degradation? Now, the principal direct cause of forest loss is the conversion of forests to agriculture, settlements, infrastructure, and industry. And in addition, there is commercial extraction of fuel wood, much of it which goes to areas outside the forest dependent communities. There is illegal felling and grazing of cattle, and grazing of cattle is primarily by the forest dependent communities. And these causes have some, originate in some deeper issues. Their origin lies in the fact that the environmental values provided by forests are not realized as direct financial benefits by various parties, at least to the extent of exceeding the monetary incomes from alternative uses, including illegal use. So the value of the resource is actually not appropriated by those who, who actually deplete the forest, degrade the forests, and so they have they develop an interest in degrading the forest. Now in India, since antiquity, forest dwelling communities had generally recognized traditional community entitlements of the forests and therefore had strong incentives to use the forest sustainably and to protect them from encroachers. Next slide, please. However, in 1865, in the colonial administration, formal forest laws were enacted, and there is a rich debate from that period about the question of whether to retain the traditional forestry rights or to supplant them with formal forest laws, which effectively made the state the owner of the resources. And this debate was unfortunately settled in favor of formal forest laws. And so these entitlements to the traditional communities were effectively extinguished in many parts of the country. And when this disempowerment happened, this led to the forest becoming open access, and this was thus a classic manifestation of the tragedy of the commons. Now, it has also led to perennial conflict between the forest dependent communities and the forest department, and this constitutes a major denial of justice, which is to some extent sought to be reversed now. Now, the Panchayat extension to the Scheduled Areas Act of 1996 and the relevant provisions of Part 9 of the Constitution may provide a framework for restoration of the key traditional entitlements. And some of the other speakers have spoken of some attempts to do so, NEP 2006, and of course, the question of the extent to which they have been successful is still open. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So, what are the strategies for forest conservation that were identified? The first was to give legal recognition to the traditional entitlements of forest dependent communities, taking into consideration the provisions of the PESA Act 1996, to formulate an innovative strategy for increase of forest and tree cover from the 2003 level of 23.69% of the country's area to 33% through afforestation of degraded forest land, wastelands, and tree cover on private or revenue lands. And the question of the strategy has received a fillip with India's commitment under the Paris Agreement to put in place, to sequester 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon additionally through forest and tree cover. Now, the key elements of such a strategy, this would include implementation of multi-stakeholder partnerships involving the forest department, landowning agencies. There are many landowning agencies in the government, for example, the railways and the defense, establishments, which have actually vast tracts of land. They're not necessarily forest land, but the question is that these lands could be used for afforestation. The local communities and investors, with clearly defined obligations and entitlements for each partner, following good governance principles to derive environmental, livelihood, and financial benefits. Now, I'm afraid this aspect has not proceeded very far till now. Next, please. The second is rationalization of restrictions on cultivation of forest species outside notified forests to enable farmers to undertake social and farm forestry where risk return profiles are more favorable than cropping. This comes from a recognition that serious disincentives are caused to farmers who wish to take up social forestry because of irrational restrictions under the forest laws on the cultivation of forest species in non-forest areas. The universal adoption of community-based practices such as joint forest management, one panchayats in forest management, with assured participation of women throughout the country. To focus public investments on enhancing the density of natural forests, mangroves conservation, and universalization of community-based practices. Next, please. To formulate an appropriate methodology for reckoning and restoring the environmental values of forests, which are unavoidably diverted to other uses. To formulate and implement a code of best management practices for dense natural forests to realize the objectives and principles of the National Environment Policy. Forests of high indigenous genetic diversity should be treated as entities with incomparable value. What this essentially means is that areas of high indigenous genetic diversity should be essentially treated as no go, and they cannot be diverted for typical infrastructure or industrial projects or projects for habitations. And it's only in the most severe and dire situations of national interest that they can be diverted. To denotify bamboo and other similar forest species under the Forest Conservation Act to facilitate their cultivation outside notified forests and encourage their productive utilization in economic activities. To promote plantation of only such species as are conducive to the conservation and sustainability of given ecosystems. Next, please. So now I turn to the question of biodiversity, traditional knowledge, and natural heritage. Next, please. We look at the importance of biodiversity and traditional knowledge according to the National Environment Policy of 2006. So conservation of genetic diversity is crucial for development of improved crop varieties resistant to particular stresses, new farmer products, and so on, apart from ensuring the resilience of ecosystems. Traditional knowledge possessed by local communities is the base of their livelihoods and also a means of unlocking the value of genetic diversity through reduction in search costs. Heritage sites, including endemic biodiversity hotspots, sacred groves, and landscapes, are repositories of significant genetic and ecosystem diversity. Landscapes are also an important basis for ecotourism, and natural heritage sites also enable evolution of wild species in response to change in environmental conditions. So this is the policy understanding of why biodiversity and traditional knowledge are important. Next, please. Now, what are the risks to biodiversity in India? Quite apart from the risks that we saw for forests. So first, of course, are development projects, highways, dams, agriculture, and so on. They threaten wild species. So apart from the fact that areas of high endemism are diverted for such development projects, the development projects also cut across the breeding habitats of many different species, and so this islands many wildlife species. The second is extraction of species leading to degradation of ecosystems. There are a number of species which are commercially valuable and which have been over extracted. The isolation of wild habitats leading to homogeneous meta population. I've just talked about that. So the infrastructure projects, they island populations of wildlife, and so these wildlife actually the genetic pool in which they can multiply is reduced. There are global demands of agricultural products of limited sets of varieties or breeds of domesticated biodiversity. The lack of IPRs over traditional knowledge leading to commercialization of products of certain species, and risks due to LMOs and GMOs. Next, please.
Dr. Gosh, we have another 10 minutes so that we could have a big, long 30-minute discussion with participants.
I have just a couple of slides left.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So next slide, please. So let's look at the strategies for conservation of biodiversity in the National Environment Policy. The first is strengthen protection of areas of high endemism of genetic resources while providing alternative livelihoods and access to resources to local communities. Pay explicit attention to the potential impacts of development projects on biodiversity, resource, and natural heritage. In appraisal of such projects by cost-benefit analysis, assign values to biodiversity resources at or near the upper end of the range of uncertainty. In particular, ancient sacred groves and biodiversity hotspots should be treated as possessing incomparable values, meaning that they cannot be diverted to other uses. enhance ex situ conservation of genetic resources in designated gene banks across the country, and the genetic material of threatened species of flora and fauna must be conserved on priority. Next, please. To harmonize provisions for the denial and termination of patents in the Patent Act 1970 with the provisions under the Biodiversity Conservation Act, in particular to enable local communities holding traditional knowledge and use of genetic resources to benefit from providing access to such knowledge, to formulate an appropriate system for prior informed consent and fair and equitable benefit sharing in respect of biological material and traditional knowledge of use of genetic resources, to enable the country and local communities to derive economic benefits from providing access. Next, please. So these strategies for conservation of forests, biodiversity, traditional knowledge, and natural heritage, they reflect both anthropocentric, that is for human benefit, and deep ecology perspectives, where we consider that there is value in ecosystems and biodiversity quite apart from any interest that the human beings may have. The actual adoption of legislation, regulation, and programs to give effect to these remain work in progress. And the other speakers in this session will address some of these questions, and indeed, they already have since they have preceded me. So that's all I have. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Now we will have the question and answer. Please turn on your camera, address the speaker that you would like to ask. Any questions?
So there is a question from Tiki. Oh, yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I have a question. It's actually to Nima ma'am or Meenal ma'am. If they're responding it would be fine. My question is something specifically related to the Forest Rights Act. Under the Forest Rights Act, the claims over the land were actually settled as a benchmark of 2005 to the tribal people as well as the other traditional forest dwellers. So in case of the population growth and the coming generations requirement and need, the land claim cannot be expanded. So this is going to be a major clash or issues, particularly in the conservation landscapes in the protected areas as well. So how do we actually resolve and address this clash? And the second question is somewhat connected to that. With respect to this growing population of tribal population or the human habitation, along with the increased population in the wildlife, because of the attainment of the objectives of the protected area and the conservation strategies. So how do we actually balance both in a community conserved regime or an inclusive conservation regime? So how do we actually deal such a scenario? That's what my question.
It's Forest Rights Act came about, destruction of and forest habitats. So what we've been doing, we were one of the few organizations along with a network, started tracking this. I mean, what is really the impact of implementation of the Forest Rights Act? And I would just give you a few examples where the implementation of the act is really, really slow, particularly in protected areas. But I'll give you an example of Yaval, which is in Maharashtra, which was because of being a border conservation site, protected area between two states, it inevitably had smuggling land. Both the state governments were not able to deal with it, and there was also local corruption involved. And because the local interventions were not recognized, there was no possibility of the local people to exclude those who did not belong there traditionally. So the locals actually started process, once the Gram Sabhas, there were about 18 Gram Sabhas who participated in this process, and once their rights were recognized, they began to understand they needed to get involved in the conservation as they used to do traditionally. So, in collaboration with the Forest Department, over I think 1,000 hectares of forest encroachment was removed, and these were people where through bullets and guns, but negotiations amongst the people themselves negotiated and convinced their own relatives to not encroach beyond 2005 deadline. So they made sure that individual rights were recognized for the people who were already cultivating before 2005. But most villages actually claimed for the community forest right, which is a right to sustainably use and manage forest areas. So you have a possibility developing management plans and strategy. This is one example. The second example I will give you from the Biligiri Rangaswamy Temple Sanctuary in Karnataka, where in fact, if you look at the tiger census report of 2018, the population of tiger has more than doubled where the rights of the people have been recognized. So we were talking about certain assumptions before, because it is invariably assumed that where the rights are recognized, they are necessarily going to lead to detriment of wildlife, but our evidence from the ground shows to the contrary. In fact, in areas outside of protected areas where people have claimed lands, there the wildlife will exist and where people are able to sustain their local livelihoods, are able to restore now, and wildlife is returning. I'll give you an example of Panchgaon, which is the buffer zone of Tadoba Tiger Reserve, and in Ghat Tiger Reserve. So there are enough evidence to show that if we follow the provisions of the Forest Rights Act, which is quite clear in terms of how these claims can be recognized, it leads to positive conservation outcomes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, now we have a question from Buddha Ditya. For Patty Moore, would you like to state your question?
So we've been talking about compliance and enforcement as being a problem area. So I just wanted Patty to respond to the question of what is the variance in compliance and enforcement amongst the ASEAN countries, and who does better and why.
Okay, thank you for the question. I wish I had a comprehensive answer for you. I will look to see if I can find a report that gives an overview of compliance and enforcement in protected areas in ASEAN, and I think I can channel, if I can find one, I'll channel it to you through the organizers. I can say that anecdotally, in most countries, it often depends on the area, and in some of the countries that have fewer human and financial resources, it often depends on how much external support an individual protected area might have. And I know, for example, in Lao PDR, this is particularly the case, where protected areas that have, say, an international, NGO that is helping them with wildlife conservation or something like that, they tend to have better, but that doesn't mean they're always perfect, results with compliance and enforcement. That said, I've also just heard that there are, with the best funded protected area in Lao PDR that has funding from a dam, this was from the Namtuntu Dam. Even there are difficulties with both compliance and enforcement. So even having enough money really isn't the answer. A lot of it is a question of educating just the general public in every country, educating communities that live in and around protected areas, and in particular, educating those who are bringing tourists into protected areas. Now, that's not an issue right now with COVID, but it has definitely been an issue in the past. And once people are free to travel again, it will probably become an issue again in the future.
Shyam, would you like? Are you?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Yeah. Who would you like
Good
to
evening,
direct your
all.
question? Would you like to direct your question to? Please go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, all. Thank you for that right exposition. So, my question is to Pradeep Ghosh, sir, and maybe the other panel members can also chip in. So, we have negotiated the RED Plus and the RED Plus under the International Climate Change regime. So, I would like to know how it is going to impact the conservation efforts, so the protected area management in India, and also the tribal rights and the rights of other forest dwellers in India.
Well, my familiarity with the RED Plus, agenda under the climate change that ceased as of 2012. But essentially, the problem that India and some other similarly placed countries faced at that time was that the resources for sustainable forest management would actually have very low priority, and in realistically there would be very little available for sustainable forest management. So as so long as afforestation and reforestation is concerned, possibly there may be some funds, but when it comes to sustainable forest management, and particularly when the tribals and the local communities are involved in sustainable forest management, I do not think, given that my knowledge is frozen at 2012, could expect any significant resources to flow to them. Of course, the point is that no international agreement can can amend or abridge the rights of any of our citizens, including the forest dependent communities.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, here's another one. Kin, please.
My question is to Dr. Ghosh. Just this morning, I was attending a meeting, and I heard from a forest department official from Pakistan, and he said that the forest department in Pakistan has just announced a new urban forest policy, so they will be involved. So, like in my country, in Myanmar, our forest department, of course, looks after the forests, but they're not involved anyway regarding the forests or the trees in the urban areas. And what about Indian Forest Department? Because I heard, in the past few days that there's an air pollution problem in north of India. And, the forest people, the foresters are best equipped with the knowledge. So is the Indian Forest Department involved in the urban areas? And if you are, to what extent? Thank you.
Well, you see, the forest department has jurisdiction over the whole country. So there are certain aspects of forestry laws that apply even to urban areas. For example, if in an urban area some trees have to be cut to facilitate the construction of a road, then the point is that an assessment has to be carried out by the forest department. If they agree, then they will impose certain conditions like compensatory afforestation. The practice that is increasingly gaining ground is actually to transplant the trees which are coming in the way. But the mandate of the forest department extends to the whole country, and the ambit of the forest laws extend to the whole country. Now, your point about pollution, I mean, this is certainly a very important consideration, and it is now widely recognized that and in fact this really stems from the Forest Conservation Act of the 1980s, that the forests in India, their main function are environmental services, including urban environmental services, and not the production of timber or other commercial products. Now, the point, of course, is that there are, urban forestry has to be taken up by the local development authorities and the municipal bodies and so on. And, the municipal bodies, most of them are strapped for funds. And those which have sufficient funds, for example, the municipal corporations in Delhi, they have undertaken significant afforestation works. So, in fact, Delhi, where the urban municipalities actually have significant funds, and also Delhi itself is a state, comprises a state which has a lot of financial resources, that they have undertaken aggressive forestry programs in the urban areas precisely for such environmental benefits.
Our
Thank
next
you,
question.
Doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Gosh and Kin. This is an opinion. Vidya, who would you like to direct your question to on biopiracy?
Thank you for the opportunity. My question is, should biopiracy involve an impact on our vulnerable stakeholders likely to be exploited if their knowledge is commercialized? Or is the threshold of patenting any product deemed morally to be owned by commons for commercial use in itself is enough for them to patent the good?
Who would like to respond?
Well, if no one's going to take the question, I can take the question.
Okay.
You see, I mentioned in my presentation that two things are necessary. One is that we have to harmonize the provisions of the Biodiversity Conservation Act with the Patents Act of 1970 to provide that if there is evidence of biopiracy, then the patents can be terminated, or if they have not yet been granted, then the patents can be refused. And this is an ongoing process. But what has been done in between is with respect to traditional knowledge, that a lot of traditional knowledge with respect to biodiversity resources, they have been indexed in the traditional knowledge digital system, TKDL system. And this TKDL website, all significant patent authorities all over the world are given access to this database in the TKDL. And this has actually prevented a number of patents being granted which are based on, which use genetic resources and are based on traditional knowledge. For example, you would have read about denial of patents in the US to turmeric and things like that. Now,
We lost Dr. Gosh. Would anyone want to respond? Or we try to get Dr. Gosh back on?
He's still on the call. His connection just faded for a bit, so we'll just wait for him to reconnect.
So, Christina?
Yeah.
Yeah, we might have to bring the questions to a close so we can have a bit of a break before we start the next session.
Okay.
Dr. Puneeth.
Okay, so we will close this session now and have or we'll wait for Dr. Gosh to get back. Angelo, how's it looking?
It doesn't look like he'll be able to make it back before the break, so maybe we can just go on break and pick it up after.
Okay.
Is there any other questions? Maybe we can. Is there any other questions? We can have another 5 minutes or something. Or not.
Going. Thank you very much for your patience for our technical gremlins, as Angela called them today. They finally got through, but thank you so much for bearing with us and continue, and to our speakers, that was excellent. And I will see you in 15. Yes. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Back in 15 minutes, please.
Yes.
So we can start as quickly as possible. Or even if we could probably
For
come
10,
back in
yeah.
10 minutes, that probably would be good.
Yeah.
For the next presentation and workshop. I see Dr. Puneet is there, so thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll just be 10 minutes because we had 30-minute problem to start with technical issues, so I apologize for that.
Thanks,
Did you want to?
Dr.
Did you want to?
Start? Or no? No.
Yes.
Okay. Fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
So, Dr. Panita, I've also made you presenter, and I think you have your presentation and already.
Sure.
So, okay. And I do apologize. We had a Cisco challenge.
That's perfectly fine. No issues at
So
all.
we're trying to catch up. Sorry, Nupur. I'm dreadful trying to keep time. So
No, you're much better than me. There's no competition. No, you can just take Puneet for granted, he's just across the
no,
corridor.
never. Our speakers are the things that make it all possible. So
No, I'm just joking. I'm just
okay, so I will see. I think Dr. Puneet, you're fine with sharing the video and.
Yeah, I think so. But there is some disturbance still, I guess. Some voices are breaking sometimes.
Yes, we're not sure why, but today has been particularly challenging with a range of things.
I know. I bought a camera. I dressed up. I had a scarf. Everything was all planned.
No, we did it deliberately to sabotage you.
I know. I said it was my big debut. No, but it's good that Angela and I tested at 9. And we're like, I tested 3 computers. Today was like we have to check the Chinese calendar.
So, Dr. Ghosh, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm sorry we were so late in starting and had so many technical issues. But thank you very much indeed for your presentation, and we can share that with our participants as well.
I don't think he's able to hear us at this point. He's
Okay.
just trying to. He's struggling to just get into the call and stay in the call.
Okay, so Angela, could you thank him very much, and
Sure.
I will see you in 5 minutes. So.
Okay.
Thank.
चेक कर लीजिए चेक कर लीजिए Hmm. Yeah, wait. No, I can't buy you. Please be long. Where are these people are waiting?
Is there anything you want to touch up?
Thanks, Angelo, for
Sarah?
we might just wait a few more moments. I've got 25 participants, so normally it's up to 30. Is everything okay, Angelo? You look a little worried.
Well, given today's little gremlins, you never know which one will come up and bite you next. But I'll message everyone. Check that.
Okay. It was just to teach us a little bit of humility, I think.
Yeah, don't get too puffy. how's the cyclone from your end?
It's another function.
So, Professor, I think we can start. So thank you all very much. Welcome back. Again, apologies for our technical issues, and we're very pleased now to welcome Associate Professor Puneeth back again for his presentation. And just to remind us that he's the Associate Professor of Law for the Centre for the Study of Law and Governance in Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He has a BAL LLB, the 5-year integrated course, an LLM, and a PhD from Bangalore University. Before joining the centre, he was serving as Assistant Professor of Law in the Indian Law Institute, the premier institute for legal research and higher education in law in the country since 2006. He has also served as a member of the Board of Studies and the Academic Council of ILI. He's an assistant editor of the Journal of the Indian Law Institute. He has a wide range of teaching and research areas of interest: constitutional and administrative law, judicial processes, judicial administration, law and justice in a globalizing world, human rights and criminal law. His doctoral work, as I mentioned before, was on the topic Impact of Global Regulatory Regime on Indian Constitution, a Critical Study. So he is today, though, presenting on the issues in relating to course methodology and preparation. And Dr. Puneeth, please, the screen and the technology is all yours. So thank you very much indeed for returning to us today.
Puneeth, unmute.
Sorry. Can you unmute? Unfortunately, you're still on mute, I think. No, if you could try it again, please.
I muted sir right now, but then again it got muted. Wait, I'll just try to help sir.
Okay. No?
He got unmuted and then he got muted again. Okay.
Mute seems to be... Dr.
All right,
Puneeth.
all right, he's unmuted now.
It's fine now. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
Thank you very much,
if you,
Dr. Matthew, for this opportunity.
thank you.
Before beginning, let me wish you all a very happy Constitution Day. As all of you know, that this is a session in continuation of the one we had on syllabus revision and review on 23rd of November. In that session, I emphasized on the importance of competency-based or learning outcome-based development of course curriculum for law courses. Defining competencies should be central to the development of curriculum, not just for one or some courses, but for the entire program. Let me start with the presentation. Though I had presented few slides in the last session, I think it is appropriate to begin again from the beginning in view of the fact that we are trying to rush through in the last session that we had. So let me first briefly tell you about the idea of competency-based education. It is a system or a model of education that focuses on assessing and grading students based on their ability to demonstrate well-defined competencies, which are also called as learning outcomes or the learning targets. And it has been defined in the Glossary of Education Reforms. As you can see the definition there on screen, it is a system of instructions, assessment, and grading. It includes all the processes. Hello?
Sorry, Professor. Is it possible for you to click the yes. slideshow? Yeah, then it'll bring up the full screen.
Yeah, fine. Thank you. It focuses on all aspects from instruction to assessment to the grading system and reporting of the grades based on the students' ability to demonstrate what they have learned, the knowledge and skills that they expect, whether they have learned the knowledge and skills that they expected to learn by the time they complete the course. It is seen as an alternative to the conventional approaches in which the students may or may not acquire the competency of proficiency in a given course or academic program by the time they complete. Even if they have acquired, then there is no way of assessing whether or not they have acquired those qualities or competences. It aims at ensuring that the student acquire the specified competencies once the competencies are defined as to whether on completion of a particular course, what are the competencies that a student should have acquired. If there is a clarity over it, then it is important to ensure that the student acquire those competencies during the course or academic program, and then they are able to demonstrate the same on completion of each of the course or the program. So how to develop this competency-based course curriculum is one of the important issues. There are 4 stages or components for developing it. First is defining the competencies that need to be acquired or developed by the students during the course. So as I said, it is not just for one course. The competencies can be defined for the entire program as well. That is what we have been trying to do in the project in which myself and Professor Shantakumar are associated with. I just had a word with Professor Santakumar. He told me that he would be joining some 10 minutes late today. He is in another function. So he will also explain some of the things that I'm going to present to you in the first place. So is to define competencies in the first place for the entire program or for each course particularly. And then designing the course or courses that aims at developing those competencies. You need to then, once you have a clarity about what competences the students would acquire on completion of a particular course or a program, then the courses should be so designed, and each course also should be designed, each module and unit of each course should be designed to ensure that they help the students in acquiring those defined competencies. And the third important aspect is designing appropriate methods of instruction. At what level you want the students to acquire a particular competency is one issue. Once you have a clarity, you also need to decide about the appropriate methods of instruction for each module, depending on which of the competencies that module is going to ensure. And the fourth important aspect is about designing an appropriate methods of assessment to examine whether the students after completion of the course had acquired and could demonstrate the defined competencies, because the whole focus is on, if you look at defining the competencies and then designing the entire course curriculum centered around those competencies, that each module, each unit should be designed to ensure that, and then an appropriate method of instruction shall be selected, and then an appropriate method of assessment should be adopted to examine whether or not the student has acquired, and if he has acquired, he or she can demonstrate those competencies. So these are the 4 stages. This is increasingly seen as one of the best system or a model by many higher educational institutions all over the world. The tuning project in which we both are associated with aims at developing and promoting these competency-based education in different parts of the world. It is a project that is being carried out by the Tuning Academy of the University of Deusto, which is in Spain, with the support of the European Commission. And the Tuning Academy has already started and in fact implemented tuning project in several countries within Europe and outside since 2000. They started almost 2 decades back. The aim of the project is to implement Bologna tools through building a framework for comparable, compatible, and transparent programs of studies within each country by involving the universities and higher education institutions of the respective countries. This is in fact a first stage, that to ensure that each of the educational institutions offering degree programs within the jurisdiction of any particular country should have the framework which are comparable, compatible, and transparent. The reason as to why they are working on this comparable, compatible, and transparent degree program is that, as all of you know, in this age of globalization, there has been a trans-border movement of people for education and employment purposes. It is happening at a much more larger scale than what it used to a few decades back. So there is a need to ensure that people with certain degree minimally possess certain well-defined competencies, irrespective of the place, institutions where they had acquired the degree. As I have said briefly in the last presentation, that even if you look at educational institutions offering legal education in India, there are multiple varieties of institutions that exist. We have what are called national law schools, which are of recent origin. There are 20 or 24 in number as of now. There are traditional universities offering degrees. There are private colleges affiliated to traditional university offering degrees. There are private universities that exist. There are multiple institutions that are offering degree, and there are 2 streams also. There is a 5-year LLB 3-year stream as well as 3-year LLB stream that exist. So how do we ensure that irrespective of whichever the stream a student has studied for his LLB degree and in whichever institution he has studied, irrespective of that, he or she should have minimally possessed certain well-defined competencies. If you say that a person has a law degree from any Indian university, one should be able to think that he or she has minimally possessed certain competencies. So one of the objectives behind higher education curriculum reforms also that is being envisioned in the contemporary era of globalization is to make the programs of studies offered by different universities across the globe comparable, compatible, and transparent. Even some of you may be familiar with the national education policy that was recently announced by the government of India. They are also thinking of creating what is called the academic credit bank, that if a student could not complete the education in one particular university, after suppose if there is a 5-year LLB degree, he or she could complete only 1 or 2 years, for whatever reason could not complete, then their credit gets deposited in what is called an academic credit bank. And then he or she can continue the education further in any other educational institutions, not necessary to go back to the same institution where he has originally enrolled. They can pursue the education in other institution as well. And they can avail the credits that they had acquired earlier, which is deposited in the academic credit bank. So that can only happen if degrees offered by different educational institutions are comparable, compatible, and transparent. So because of that reason as well, it is very important to develop the competency-based course curriculum for law degrees. In order to achieve the said objective of developing comparable, compatible, and transparency-based education system, the tuning project focuses on developing competency-based curriculum in the first place. At the first stage, they're trying to make degrees offered by different education institutions in India comparable, compatible, and transparent. As I said, they have a larger aim of making it at an international level as well. But in the first place, they need to ensure that at least the degrees offered by different educational institutions within the country are comparable, compatible, and transparent. Then they can work at the next stage to internationalize the same thing. Then how do we go about it? By ensuring that students on completion of their degree acquire competencies that are comparable, the degree programs are compatible, and the process of whether or not the students have acquired those competency is transparent. The tuning project was started by the Tuning Academy, which aims at this to particularly implement the Bologna tools in the Indian universities as well. This has brought together 15 Indian universities along with 5 European partners. This is a project. Tuning India in particular is a project that has started in the year 2017. And the tuning project is initially focusing on 4 selected subjects in India. They're focusing on law, they're focusing on ICT, information and communication technology, medicine, and teacher education. And these are the institutions that are associated, that are involved in the subject group law in the Tuning India program. Professor Shantakumar and myself are the coordinators, and there are representatives from, of course, one European university, representative from Deusto University itself, and we have representative from Savitribai Phule University and Jagan Lake City University of Bhopal, and Adamus University of Kolkata, and Vinoba Bhave University from Hazaribagh, India. So these are it is a 7-member group that is working on the subject group law for developing competency-based course curriculum for the law courses. What we have done so far is to develop what are called generic competences and specific competences. And of course, as regards the generic competences, I'll tell you briefly about the process in which we have developed that. But what do I mean by generic competences? They refer to those competences or qualities which everyone, whoever has acquired a graduation in any discipline in any Indian university, is required to have developed or acquired during their graduation. It is not something that is specific to the law graduates. If a person has acquired a degree in science, in commerce, in arts, engineering, medicine, irrespective of the degree, there are certain qualities that every graduate from any Indian university must have acquired. So what are those qualities that we can generally think that every graduate should have is what the generic competences. And then there are specific competences that refers to those competences which a person who has an undergraduate degree in a specific subject area is expected to have developed. Say, for example, if a person has a law degree, in addition to the generic competences, which is expected of all graduates, a law graduate should have additionally acquired certain competences which are specific to his or her own discipline, which are specific to the law. The process that we have adopted for developing these competencies, we have had series of meetings. There are 4 general body meetings that were held, including the European and Indian partners of all disciplines, all the 4 disciplines that I had mentioned. The generic competences are those which is being developed by all the teams together. Initially, we of course worked in each subject area group. The law group has developed its own set of generic competences and its own set of specific competences. And these are the competences that are developed not for any one particular course in the law program, but for the entire law program. So once we had some consensus among ourselves and developed both the list of generic and the list of specific competences, as regards the generic competences are concerned, then since each of the groups have developed their own set of generic competences, there was a meeting held among all of them to decide what should be the generic competences that every graduate of any discipline should have in India. So that is the list that is finalized not just by the law group, but also with the involvement of representatives of all other groups as well. And then the specific competences are the one which was almost finalized by the law group itself. So these are the two sets of competences that we have developed. I'm going to briefly present this is actually the initial draft. We have further worked on it, and that is in the process of finalization. But I'm presenting the list of competences that we have actually developed in the very first meeting that we had in Bangalore somewhere in 2017. So this is just the list. I'm not going to read out. So if a person has a graduation from in any discipline, these are the competences that she should have developed. Ability to do research. Of course, it is not in a particular order also that we have worked on it subsequently. Ability to manage a crisis effectively, adhere to ethical principles, act within the legal framework, irrespective of the discipline. It is not just specific to the law graduates. Be socially responsible and humane, demonstrate environmental and economic consciousness, ability to apply knowledge practically. So these are the list we have developed somewhere around. Maybe I'll share the slides with you later on. You can have a look at them. So these are the list of generic competences that we have developed. And then
can I intervene here, Dr.
Yes,
Puneet?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
Maybe instead of showing them all these competencies, so why not we ask them, you just give them a brief about competencies and let them think and come out with something so that then they can match with this list.
Yeah, initially then I thought probably you would be joining late. Meanwhile, I'll tell them and then start that exercise.
Then they will get an idea and then they will start remembering and writing the same things.
Yes, so otherwise we can do that. I can come to this little later.
Yeah.
This is what we develop: generic and specific competences. So now that if we have to develop, as I've said before, that the list that I've shown you is the list of competences that a law graduate after completion of the entire law degree must possess, must have acquired. But there are multiple courses that are taught in the law courses, in the law program, and different courses aim at developing different competences for the students. Not that each of the competencies that we have listed, 30 plus or so, 25 specific competences or 30 generic competences, not that all these competencies can be developed through one particular course. It is only after studying 50 or 52 courses, whatever the number of courses that are offered in the entire degree program, that the students must have acquired those competences. But keeping that in view, each course, when we develop each of the course, we need to have a clarity about what are the competences, either generic or a specific competence, that that particular course is going to ensure, is going to make the students acquire once that particular course is completed and he or she moves on to the next level. So that is where we need to think about in the first place. Suppose if a course curriculum for the environmental law course at an undergraduate level needs to be developed, what is that can be minimally expected of a student who has completed that particular course in that particular semester is what we need to have a clarity about. So what can be done as an exercise, initially we thought of having this small exercise so that each of you can apply your mind and think about and come up with your own list of competences, a couple of them maybe, that you think that any person who has completed a course in environmental law should acquire by the time he or she completes that particular course. So initially we thought of like showing you the entire course, then probably you might get the entire list of competences, but you might get influenced. What instead you can do is to think on your own. In any case, I have shown some of them particularly, but think on your own. What is that is expected of a student who has done an environmental law course? What competences he or she should have acquired, and make a list of them. Forget about whether they are a generic competence or specific competences. A combined list of competences a student on completion of an environmental law course should have acquired. That's the first important thing. Second important thing, when you have to develop the course curriculum for the environmental law course, is to map those competences with the different units or modules in the existing environmental law course, start at the UG level in your respective institutions and universities. Because it is now a mandatory course to be taught, environmental law course. You must, once you have a clarity about what competences a student should have, then you can evaluate your own existing course to understand how far your course provides for achieving those competences. Other day when I made a brief intervention when we are discussing about the syllabuses, I pointed out that sometimes we have a course objective, learning outcome set out, but the course modules, the units that you have do not speak to the learning outcomes. There is no correlation between the two. That is something that needs to be taken care of. That is the second important thing that we thought of asking you to do. And then in the third stage, to think of what revision that needs to be carried out to the existing course that you have in order to ensure that all the relevant competences are acquired by the students. Make necessary additions or modifications accordingly. That is what, of course, you will not be able to complete the whole exercise now in this particular session, but you must keep this in mind even when you go back and think of revising a course. Sometimes the course contents that you have for the particular course, the environmental course, perhaps far outshoot the objectives that you have set out. It exceeds the objectives that you have set out. Sometimes the learning outcome that you have mentioned can never be acquired by a student, even if they complete the entire course, because none of the course modules or unit actually correlates to the learning outcome. So that should not happen. So once you have clarity about it and then assess your course, the third stage is to see what changes are needed to be made to the course curriculum that you have at your respective institute or the university. And then the fourth stage is to devise the appropriate method of evaluation to assess whether the student has acquired those defined competencies and could demonstrate them. I missed out one important point here, that is about choosing the appropriate method of instruction as well. What module or what unit should be taught in what way. So the lecture method is most suitable for all. Should there be a discussion method, simulation method? There are multiple methods in which different topics can be taught, and it also depends on what level of learning that you expect of the students in choosing the appropriate method of teaching as well. So that is in fact the fourth one, and this is the fifth of designing the appropriate method of evaluation of the students to assess whether or not they've acquired those competences. If they've acquired, whether or not they can demonstrate those competences whenever required. So this is what a small task that we were thinking of asking you to do. Of course, as I said, you'll not be able to do all of it in this workshop itself. At least and concentrate on the first important task of defining the competencies for the environmental law course, so that if there is a consensus on what competences the students can have, consensus among all institutions participating in this program as to what competences are must that a student should have acquired on completion of the environmental law program. So how do you go about defining the environmental law program? This is what we have also been told before. When we started developing these competences, we did it for the entire program, as I said, to follow the Bloom's taxonomy for defining the competences. In the Bloom's taxonomy, there are 6 levels of learnings that he has prescribed, Benjamin Bloom. And the lowest level of learning is remembering. That's the lowest level of learning, recalling the relevant knowledge from long-term memory. The next level is understanding. Third is applying. Fourth is analyzing. Fifth is evaluating. And the sixth is creating. You should be very clear about when you have the course in place with different modules and different units. You should be also clear about what is the level of learning that you expected them to have for each module or each unit. There are certain things which you expect them to only know, and there are certain things where you want them to develop more critical abilities as well. So you should also keep that in mind while developing the course, and while in the first place defining the objectives. Once you have defined it, that's where you can also reflect what is the objective. Do you want the students to remember certain things, or do you want them to have a deeper understanding of what they're actually about? And do you also want them to develop the ability to apply the knowledge that they have acquired, or to analyze, evaluate, or to create, putting information together in a more innovative way, or developing it further, the existing literature? So there should be a clarity about what is the level of learning that you expect your students to have on completion of the program. And accordingly, the Bloom's taxonomy provides us with some appropriate words that can be used for describing the different level of learning. The remembering, as I said, level 1 is the lowest level of learning. And when you use, when your idea is to ensure that a student, after completing a particular module within a course, should be able to only remember that particular part, then these are the appropriate words that you can choose for defining the competency, that the student will be able to recall or outline, describe, identify, list, or label those things, whatever, depending upon what you intend to do. These are illustrative, not exhaustive one. And if you want the student to have an understanding of it, not just about ability to recall, remember, but also to have an understanding, then these are the appropriate words that you can choose for defining those competencies. And for applying, for analyzing, evaluating, and creating, there are different, you can just Google it, you'll find all of them on Google, the Bloom's taxonomy of learning levels of learning. So you can use them for developing that. So this is in brief about how to, in the first place, develop the competencies that a student should have acquired. And then maybe if the time permits, we'll discuss briefly about a few other things. And at the end, I'll also show the competencies that we have developed in the project later, as Professor Shantakumar has suggested. Now that we can take a break about 5-10 minutes, would you like to come and explain how we should go about?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Puneet. Can you just go back to that 4 points in environmental, that slide?
This one?
Talking about the syllabus, assessment, and all those things.
Okay. I started with the beginning this thing, no?
No. Just a few slides before this.
Okay. This is
Bloom's taxonomy.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is the one.
Yes. Yes. No, next.
This is the one.
No, next one.
Are the next one?
No. I think the one what you showed, like the syllabus, environmental syllabus. Yeah. How do we go about? Correct.
This is the one.
Yes. Right. Yeah. Can I request you to switch off your mic?
Okay.
There is an echo from you. So good evening to all the wonderful participants of this TTT. I'll just explain. In fact, theoretically, Puneet had explained everything that what we want you to learn from this exercise. I'm just trying to explain it again with an example. Like, for example, you all know that a major part of environmental law, the environmental jurisprudence in this country was developed through PILs, right? So all of you know that PILs have contributed significantly to the development of environmental jurisprudence in India. Now, if I am an environmental law teacher, I understand that a major portion of the subject that what I am going to talk about in my environmental law class is or was the outcome of the judgments of the Supreme Court or various high courts in certain public interest litigations, mostly MC Mehta, or in certain other cases there are certain other petitioners as well. Now, as an environmental law teacher, I will feel that, right, I'm going to teach this subject to my students for a semester, and I need to tell them a lot about public interest litigations related to environmental law, and therefore, at the end of this course, my students will be able to draft a PIL. So this is what is one competency that what I aspire that I should impart to my student in my classroom. So in that case, now I have identified one specific competence that I'll say that students will be able to draft a public interest litigation, right? Now, what I need to do is I will now map these competencies with the syllabus. That is what is point number 2 here. Map those competencies. Now, in my syllabus, I need to see whether is there any module in which I'm going to train my students in drafting a PIL. Is there anything in any topic within the module, within the syllabus, which will give me an opportunity to give them the skills? So this is what we need to do when I say mapping these competencies with the different units or sections in the existing environmental law course. You need to see, first you identify a competency and see whether that scope for giving this competence to your student is inbuilt into the curriculum or not. That is the second important thing. Puneet, can I request you to move to the next slide?
Yes.
Yes. Now, if I see that I'm teaching a syllabus where there is nothing I can do about a PIL. So now I need to think of revising my course by adding in a module which talks about, maybe right to environment under Article 21 or Constitution and environment, or whatever way you have given the title for that module. Now I will have to include one topic wherein I will say that students, or I should include something about public interest litigation and environmental jurisprudence. So I should make some necessary additions or modifications. Now the fourth one, what Puneet said that he had missed in this slide, is the method of teaching. Now I know that my students should acquire this competency of drafting a public interest litigation. Now, how do I impart that training? So I need to have some drafting workshop to my students where they will be exposed. I can show some of the actual PILs filed in the Supreme Court. I can bring it and then I can show it to the students in the classroom. That is one option. I can make them write one application. I can make them draft one PIL during the class hours by giving them some hypothetical facts. or I can bring some practitioners to the classroom who have actually filed a PIL, who can, talk about their experience and train them that how did they go about, how did they investigate this, what made them file this PIL, then what are the facts and statistics that they have collected before they approach the court, how did they put it together. And then the last thing is devise the appropriate method of evaluation. Now I need to ensure that in my question paper, there must be a question on drafting a PIL. So if you talk about one competency that my students should be able to draft a PIL, it should be approached from all these points. I should look at, I should first identify that as a competency, drafting PIL. Second, I should check whether the syllabus has it. Third one, if it doesn't have, I need to make some changes. Fourth one, I need to decide the method of imparting training to the students to acquire that skill. And number 5 is, after acquiring that skill, how do I assess? Maybe I'll give some assignments. I give them some credits, either as part of my continuous evaluation, or maybe I include a question in the end semester examination so that I assess that. So that this is how scientifically the subject need to be taught. If we can, create a scientific mapping of our expectations and the syllabus and the way we teach and the way we assess a student, then there is the outcome is definitely it's going to create an impact in the students' outcome. In fact, what they call it as the graduate outcome. Right. So this is one example. I just gave an illustration to explain the same thing what Dr. Puneet had said. So now I think we can we will give you maybe 10 minutes. All of you can take 10 minutes from now. Now exactly the time is 5:45. So exactly at 5:55, please be prepared to identify at least 5 core competencies that what your students would want to possess, your students of environmental law, what competencies they will acquire after you teaching this course to them. This is what we want to know. You just identify those five competencies, each one of you. Now you can start working without any disturbance. You can list down 5 competencies, and then maybe on seeing the screen, me or Dr. Puneet will randomly call people to read out those competencies, and then you should be in a position to explain this. Right? So now your time starts now. So we will call you one by one randomly at 5:55 to read out your competencies. Or if you are on a laptop or in a desktop, you can type it on a slide and you can share your screen. Is that fine? Any questions? Any questions? Dr. Puneet, can I request you to please stop sharing the screen so that we can view the participants?
Yes.
I'm not able to see, and I don't know whether all of them are there or not.
How do I stop sharing it?
So it will be on the top, on top of the screen.
Yeah.
There will be an option called stop sharing. Then you can click that stop sharing. Great. So dear participants, is that clear what we said? Right? Where are the participants? No, I don't see. Only 1, 2, 3, 4 participants I am able to see.
You take it everybody's busy.
Come on, please switch on your camera for some time. No, your computers will not consume more electricity if your camera is on. So are you writing?
Sir, maybe we can ask those whose cameras are not on to present their competences first.
Yes, yes. Yes. That's the best thing. Yeah. We'll start with Adya alphabetically. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think already 5 minutes are over. So 5 minutes left. I think many of you must have completed by now.
Yeah. Some are asking for
Minutes,
a
yes.
few
Yes,
minutes
sir.
more because of issues with the network.
Yes, I can see Shruti telling that she had completed.
Yes.
What about you, Simi?
Not yet, sir.
Not yet, okay. So only 4 minutes. Dr. Rana,
Not completed, sir.
completed?
Completed, sir. No,
Very
sir.
Simi, you can switch off your mic.
I'm not able to say it automatically.
No, it's for Simi.
Okay.
Last 2 minutes.
So maybe we can start with those who have actually finished it, and meanwhile
But then
others will
it might be disturbance for others, or they might pick ideas from others.
yeah.
They are living throughout with students, so they must have picked up all these skills from the students.
Yeah.
Yes, last minute, 1 more minute.
Since all of them are teaching environmental, I think it should be a problem for them to come up with at least 3, if not 5, in 10 minutes.
No, I can see, just now Shruti said she had prepared. Yeah. Within 5 minutes, she had completed 5 competencies.
Okay, great.
I think maybe she must have taken training from you. Is she part of your Erasmus Plus project?
No.
No. Okay.
You know who are all part of it, sir.
Right. I think, yeah, so time is up. Yeah, let's listen to Shruti first.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So these are the 5 things which I have listed that my students should have after completing their environment law course. So that is, first is ability to communicate, like what they learn, what we teach, what they learn, that they should be able to communicate that. Another is teamwork, because a lot of exercises what we prepare, and the group exercises we give, they should be learning teamwork through that. As one which I think I feel that every law students have, and environment law students should also have. Research and application of it in while having a real problem in solving the problems. These are the 5 problem solving.
Okay. So now it's nice that you have said communication skills, teamworking skills, drafting skills, research skills, and the 5th one you mentioned was
application while
problem solving. You said problem solving. Okay.
Yeah.
Now tell me, Shruti. I think yesterday you made a presentation on your syllabus as well, and see that which module of your syllabus deals with all these skills. Is it there currently? Now you need to map. Now you have an idea that what skill set, knowledge, what attitude your student should possess. Now see whether your syllabus is catering to your expectations. Is there anything missing, or it's all there?
So what I feel is missing, usually,
out of this 5, yeah, you don't need to add anything more. You mentioned 5. Whether all these 5 are there or not?
So research is there.
Okay.
Ability to communicate is also there. They learn and then they apply while lot of activities, assessment activities they have.
When they make presentations, when you ask them to make presentations.
Yes.
Right.
Teamwork is there because the street play they do, they have gone to the schools to talk with the teachers and the students for the climate strike.
Is it part of your syllabus? Part of your course? You ask them to do a role play?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, next.
Drafting is there. I mean,
what?
Yeah, that's what but here I was using drafting in a way for the court practice,
See, specific competencies. For example, I'm only talking about my environment. When I teach environmental law, I make them write a complaint to the Pollution Control Board about an industry letting effluents into the sewage. I ask them to prepare an appeal to the appellate authority under the Water Act.
So drafting is then.
So drafting this is what, generally drafting we can't say. We need to be very specific when we are defining competencies. That is how you impart skills to students, right? So then your entire course will become a skill-based course. Your students will definitely become like, one example that I brought yesterday, that Mandeep Kandra, when he came to my class, he admitted that he had zero interest or rather negative interest. But then now he's practicing in MGT. 80% of his cases, in fact, many environmental cases, I refer to him when he does a proper work. He doesn't charge anything, right? So how do we do that? So whether this is there in your syllabus?
Certain drafting is not there because I have not made them do any of these exercises.
Okay. Then
yes.
Last one, problem solving.
Problem solving is there because
it's there in the syllabus.
Yes, you give them case studies, you give them small problems, and what you have taught, they have to solve the problem on the basis of that. So that is there.
Okay.
Application of drafting in real life is missing.
And how do you assess them? How do you assess them? Your question paper, whether it will reflect whether your question paper is designed in such a manner to assess these skills?
Yes, assessment techniques like assessments I give, there are different assessments. They assess all these abilities in one way or another.
Now, how do you assess problem solving skills?
So problem solving skills, let's say I have given this Kiribati Island case in my climate change paper. So I have made a problem on base of that. So now they have to find out that what human rights are applicable to them. What through the Nansan agenda where that is mapped that the students. Sorry.
Okay. I think we will look at one more participant and maybe Deepa, if you are ready with your. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I have made an attempt, though. First is understand, analyze the problems relating to environment. So that will create a flow. First, we need to understand what's the problem that we are facing. And the second is understand.
I think, for example, when Dr. Puneet was presenting that Bloom's taxonomy,
based
he
on
also
that,
gave some keywords, whether the word understand is there in that keyword.
Yes, sir. That
It's
is
there.
Yeah, it is there. Understand and remember.
Okay.
Yeah, that comes.
But understanding, I don't think I have seen it in Dr. Puneet's slide.
It's there, it's a taxonomy, but not the appropriate word to be used.
Yeah, understand.
Maybe I'll show it a little later.
Maybe demonstrate or something like that. Understanding, though, it's not. It's a word prohibited by Bloom.
All right, sir.
Because this is something which you will not be able to test. Yeah. There are reasons, but again, let's go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, let's not. We have a very short time.
So I'll do away with the understanding part and
Okay.
And appreciate and analyze the concepts relating to environment.
Like
Pollution, conservation, sustainable development.
Okay.
And environment, of course.
Right. Okay.
Third, understand. Sorry, I'll do away with the understand. Apply and critically evaluate principles relating to environmental law.
Okay. Okay.
Fourth one, evaluate, compare, critically evaluate, compare.
Deepa, I think you had used critically evaluate 2-3 times. So how do you teach critical evaluation in your class?
One thing, we need to identify the loopholes that are present in the the existing laws. So critical evaluation is nothing but you are going to analyze something as a third person. So the personal.
Now, whether this is actually done in class or you are.
No, sir. I'm going to give them a problem after finishing each unit. Like there is a case which is given. All right, some facts, or for example, if I'm teaching the concept of environment, I will give them one instance or something, pertaining to where they can appreciate the concept of environment or pollution. And if I am teaching about the Forest Rights Act, which has been covered, or biodiversity. So what I will do is I will inculcate each and every concept that are involved in biodiversity. For example, biomes, ecosystems, and everything. And then I will give, some 20 lines, which problem which contains 20 lines where they will be able to
Right. Okay, let's move on to the next competence.
And then again, I have used the word understand. Appreciate the recent trends in environmental law and evaluate the sufficiency of current regulations.
Okay, so all related to appreciation only.
Appreciating, analyzing, and evaluating.
So that is one skill. So we asked you to write 5 skills.
Right. I thought
we will have time to take one more thing. I think we can invite AD Singh.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Good evening to everyone. 5 competencies what I have written are. First is to have the knowledge of the evolution of the international environmental jurisprudence we have.
Okay.
Second competency, second learning outcome, what I have pointed out is to understand and to put it rightly, to be familiar with the key principles of environmental law. Third is to be clear with the challenges which are there, which we are facing with the passage of time. And the next one is to compare compare the international settings with the way this law has developed at international level and the way it has developed at national level in India, for example. And the last would be that they should be able to communicate, as I think told by one of the former speaker, that they should be in a position to communicate what they have learned in their syllabus. So these are the things.
Fourth skill. What was the fourth skill you mentioned?
Fourth one was to be able to compare the international settings with the national settings.
Okay, so how do you assess this?
The access is meaning by they should be, if they are clear with the international environmental principles, then they should know that how
how will you assess this? Whether they have acquired this comparative skills.
Oh, okay. What I would be like, we have a project that they have to present. They have to make a project here at our university. So when they take any topic which is based on international settings, then they should be clear with it, that how say for example, precautionary principle. In number of cases in High Court and Supreme Court, this principle has been used. So they should be clear with that how it was used only after when it was decided at international level. So this is what.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Reddy Singh. I think over to Puneet.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I'll again go back to the slides.
So now I think, Puneet, you can share the list of competencies that what we have drafted.
Yes, sir.
First is generic, and then we can go to specific competencies.
Yeah. Can you see the screen, sir? Can you see my screen?
No, we are only the message is coming. The content is not visible.
Okay.
No, sir.
1 second, sir.
Yes, it is now visible.
Okay, fine.
Now we can go to the core competencies and specific competencies.
Okay, okay. These are the list of generic competences. ability to do research, ability to manage crisis effectively, adhere to ethical principles, act within legal framework, be socially responsible and humane, demonstrate environmental and economic consciousness. This is for all, as I said before. Ability to apply knowledge practically, ability to communicate effectively, ability to plan and manage time efficiently, ability to work as a team, be a lifelong learner, demonstrate higher order thinking skills, analytical, critical, abstract, or creative, acquire problem solving capacity, be a reflective practitioner, ability to make reasoned decisions, be innovative, have good interpersonal skills, ability to work independently in a responsible manner, appreciate and respect diversity and multiculturalism, self-confidence and entrepreneurial spirit, be adaptable to emerging trends, practice professionalism, promote and ensure equal opportunities including gender justice, adherence to quality standards and commitment to further enhance the same, demonstrate leadership qualities, ability to use available resources optimally and efficiently, ability to manage stress and maintain emotional stability, have a organizational and managerial skills, be motivated for self-learning, and be goal-oriented. These are the competences that a student should acquire on completion of the entire degree program. But this is not specific to the law. As I said before, these are generic competences, irrespective of the discipline a graduate in India should possess. In addition, what we are very specific about is actually the specific competences which law students must necessarily acquire. We have divided this into three categories actually: knowledge, skill, and attitude. In the knowledge, we have included these five competences: knowledge and understanding of basic legal theories, concepts, and laws. This is for the entire law program, as I said, but here it is important to understand that we're emphasizing on basic legal theories, concepts, and laws. It is not possible, as I said in the last session, to teach everything relating to law, even in the entire 5-year program. What we can do is to ensure that we have basic theories, basic concepts, and the basic laws. When you have to apply for any particular program, say for example the environmental law program, you can actually define this competency as understanding basic theories or concepts in environmental law, including the doctrines developed by the Supreme Court and the basic laws in your area. The second is knowledge, understanding of economic. We have later turned into Bloomsbury's this thing. We have later used it. Knowledge and understanding of socio-economic and political context, and ability to take them into consideration in the creation, interpretation, and application of. Third, command over legal language and official language of the court. Fourth, knowledge and understanding of various dispute resolution systems. Fifth, ability to learn and derive appropriately the beneficial components of legal systems of other jurisdictions. These are the five in the category of knowledge. Then we have this 7 in the category of skills. To have acquired legal drafting skills by the time they complete their course. Of course, in most of the law schools, there is a separate course called drafting of pleadings and conveyance that is different. When you have to apply for a particular subject, as Professor Shantakumar has already explained, drafting of, say, PALs, the applications to the Pollution Control Board or appeals to the appellate authority, they can be prescribed if you intend that that should be one of the necessary competences to have. Ultimately, the choice is yours. Seventh, the capacity to read objectively and interpret legal text in context. Eighth, capacity to dissect the facts and identify facts in issues. Capacity to find and apply the law to the facts in issue. Capacity to identify the ratio decidendi and obiter dicta in a judicial decision. Ability to do quality legal research, both doctrinal and empirical. Capacity to identify the gaps in law and innovate for legal reforms. And then ability for legal and judicial reasoning. Ability to simplify and explain law to a common man. Ability to plead case effectively. Ability to examine and cross-examine witnesses. Ability to critically analyze legal instruments. Ability to foresee consequences while enacting and interpreting law. Ability to harmonize the letter and spirit of law. Then we have set of attitudes. to have developed code craft and etiquettes, ability to practice law without compromising professional ethics, ability to do pro bono advocacy and to take up socio-legal outreach programs, ability to work as a legal expert in a transdisciplinary team, capacity to act honestly, diligently, and transparently in all professional endeavors, and commitment to justice and fairness in all situations. These are the 25 specific competences that we have developed, as I said before, and at the cost of repetition, I'm saying it again, that every law graduate after completing all the course must necessarily acquire these competences. So when you have to develop your environmental law program, of course, now that you did this short exercise, and then developed your own competences, you can also look at the list, these both generic and specific competence lists that you have developed, to see which are the competences that are more appropriate for the environmental law program. And of course, this is not exhaustive. This is a work in progress. And we are also revising it again and again to come up with final list. So you can also, if you find anything which is more appropriate that a student after completing environmental law course must have, but it is not part of this list, you can think of making those additions and including. But these are defined in more general terms, keeping in view all the courses in law, not any one particular paper. But when you have to draw from this list as a competence to be incorporated in your particular paper that you're developing, then you can actually particularize it, keeping in view the context of your paper. We did this exercise somewhere in the pre-COVID era in GNLU for one entire day. Professor Shantakumar has organized it. And we, of course, took more time because the entire day was dedicated for this exercise to explain each of these competences as well, both generic and specific competences, as to why we have chosen each of them. And then for the second half of the day to do this kind of a exercise with the participants to identify the competences and then suggest what changes they intend to make for the syllabus, to the method of instruction, to the method of evaluation and all that. So I know that this is a kind of exercise that requires perhaps much more deliberation and deeper reflection and more time perhaps to think about it. Why we thought of doing this in this short time is to introduce you these developments that are happening elsewhere as well as in India, so that whenever you in future think of developing or revising your course, you can have this method of the 4-step in the sense, first 4 or 5 step. First, to identify or define competencies. The second is to evaluate your course, existing course, as to how far the course actually meets the competencies. If it is not, then make necessary changes. Third is to identify the appropriate method of teaching. And then the fourth is to identify the appropriate method of evaluation, so that when you develop a particular course, all these components should be mandatorily part of it. And as you can understand perhaps now, that everything revolves around the competence. It is the competence which should dictate what component to be included in the course. It is the competence which you should keep in mind while deciding which is the method of teaching. And that is what you should also keep in mind while you decide appropriate method of evaluation. So whole course is designed around competences. So one should take maximum care that is possible to define in the first place what are the competences. As I saw that some of you have presented, in some of the list of 5 competences that you have said, the knowledge of basic concepts of environmental law or the basic doctrines developed by corporate is not part of your list of competence. That's the most important thing. Whatever the course, having knowledge about basic concepts in that particular area and the basic laws of the land. If you say constitution, at least the essence, the important provisions of the constitution. So knowledge is also one of the important things that one should have, which is of course the lowest level of learning as per the Bloomsbury's taxonomy, but that is important. And if you have too much of content, I'm going back to the point that I made in the previous session, then you will not be able to go to the higher level of critically evaluating or creating a new knowledge or analyzing or comparing. So that is where you need to narrow down. You can give a broad overview in the first place, and then if you want them to have a higher level of learning outcome, then that needs to be specific. You can only focus on specific topics, only on few topics. I would say that teaching even environment protection of 1986 itself is sufficient for the entire semester. There is so much of rules and regulations, everything included. It does not mean that the other things cannot be covered. They can be covered, but at what level of knowledge, learning outcome that you expect them to have with regard to all of them is important. Maybe one or two you can deal with more emphasis to ensure that with regard to those specific subjects, those specific statutes, so they can have a higher level of learning. So that it does not mean that they're expected to have only that throughout. That is just an example to make them learn how they can look at the other statutes as well. You can only do for one or max two statute. That is what is actually possible. So this is the list, and we will share these slides with all of you. It's already there with Professor Shantakumar, I think, and then I can send it to Dr. Nupur as well, so that it can be circulated if you are more interested.
Thank you, Puneet. So just to sum up, this is not rocket science. In fact, when we started, there were no compulsion for teachers to think in the line of competencies. But very recently, the University Grants Commission had come out with a guideline, a regulation, which mandates every university to come out with a learning outcome-based curriculum. You can Google for this LOBC guideline of UGC. So UGC is asking us now to do this. So this is basically, it's not a rocket science. It's very simple. You need to first decide as a teacher what kind of skill sets that you would want your student to possess. And then accordingly, you prepare a curriculum, right? And then, you should train them with more skill-oriented exercises. That is that because everywhere you must have heard, in every platform, people say that there is no connect between the theory and the practice. That is because we teach Water Act, but we don't tell them how to write a complaint to the pollution control. We don't write them, how to write an appeal, how to, say if a consent is given or consent is not given, or how do you do that? So basic things, whenever you talk of a law, you talk about the procedure and then give them some practice for it. Of course, I know that we will not have all the skill set to give our students what we think they should possess. So in such cases, you should follow the teaching method of bringing in experts to your classroom who have that skill set and they can impart that skill. So that it doesn't mean that since you don't know, it doesn't mean that you should not create an opportunity for your students to. You should. Then only you can do justice to your students, to teaching, and to this. So that is all about this exercise. I think now we will be happy to hear some feedback. Any questions? Any questions? Any feedback on this? Anything for us? Tripti is there. Tripti Bhushan. Tripti Bhushan is there. Tripti Bhushan is not there. Okay, Smita Pandey. Dr. Smita Pandey. So they are not there. I think this has become like our physical classroom, only people bunking. Yeah? So, and in technology, it's very easy. Switch off your camera and move away. No?
Sir, hello, sir.
Yes.
Hello.
Who is this?
Sir, Stella here.
Yes, Stella. Tell me, sir.
Yes, sir. Good evening. Sir, Shantakumar, sir. So
Yes.
my question is, like in our class we have different no understand levels of understanding students. Like students have different levels. Some are very good with understanding, some are good with various skills. So it is very difficult at times to bring out some common competencies among all the students and at an equivalent pace. So can you please suggest how to do so? Like some are very good with studies and some are not. So there we find a difficulty, equalizing all the students. That is
Yeah, in
one of
fact, see, that is principally the object of this exercise. You see, now what we do, we simply assess them based on a question paper, and you expect that every student will read and know. That's not the case. That is why we are telling that you impart different skill sets. And for example, team building, and you assess it by an exercise. And these students who are not good at reading books, they will do a phenomenally well when you conduct a role play. So that is the area where they can score good marks, and you can help them, cross the borders. That is how, you will have to, that is why precisely Dr. Puneet had incorporated that Bloom's taxonomy thing into the slide. Please spend time in understanding Bloom's taxonomy. That, six stages you see in Bloom's taxonomy, it actually reflects the classroom. That's why when you prepare a question paper, for example, if the pass mark is 40 marks in a subject, your assessment should have 40 marks worth of questions, which the last benches can, you are talking about those below average students.
Yeah.
You should keep 40% of 40% marks worth questions, keeping the below average students in mind, so that everybody can write and they can score 40% marks. Then another 20 marks of questions, you should aim at average students. Only, those average students will be able to write, not the below average students. And then, similarly, you should, on top of the pyramid is creation, content creation. So there you should keep that. That will be the key differentiator between the best understood student, and only that student, see, out of your class, again, it is a science. Assessment is a science. If you in fact, when you moderate a result, when you draw a bell curve, then you will find that the last 10% whom you are whom we can call as A+ or outstanding students, only those students would have written those kind of examinations, which will involve testing their creativity. So setting a question paper, it's a science. Unfortunately, law teachers do not get opportunity to be trained on all those things. We don't. We never had an opportunity to learn all these things. Unlike engineering teachers who are very familiar with Bloom's taxonomy and setting papers, question papers based on Bloom's taxonomy, assessing, remembering part to creating part, analyzing, critiquing. They will have every question at every testing all the 6 levels. So it makes, entire class to write 40% of questions. 60% of the class will write the 60% of marks worth questions. 80% of the students will write, remaining 40% will be able to write 80%, and only 10% will be able to answer 100% of your marks. So the way you distribute the questions, the type of question, the level of difficulty, the kind of questions, all these things, we need to do. I promise all of you that when things becomes normal, I will invite you to GNLU, and I'll make all of you stay on our campus, and we can do a residential training program on this aspect, right? But the travel is your cost. Local hospitality is mine, right? I will bring the best resource persons to train you on all these things, but you should bear the traveling from different parts. But we will be happy to host all of you at our campus, and I will request Professor Shobhlata to do it when things improve and when travel restrictions go. We will definitely send an invitation to all of you. So that can be a follow-up and a continuous effort that we can do. Because as we mentioned even in day one, session one, one of the principal object of this TTT is to create a network of environmental law teachers who will stay connected and who will support each other in the cause of environmental law education. And therefore, each one can mentor the other in times of difficulty. And then that's how the network progresses and we will come about with all these things, right?
Thank you,
Yes.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And where is Sonali Bhatnagar is there? Sonali Bhatnagar is not there.
Yes, sir.
Where are you? Not able to see you.
Similarly,
Yes, Sonali. So what's your feedback, Sonali, of this session? And
sir, what I think is that till now I have taught environment law only one semester.
Okay.
And yes, sir. So this is something very new for me, understanding that how I have to keep these competencies while planning my course plan and everything for the students. So in future, definitely it's going to help me a lot.
Okay. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
Shanyoli? Shanyoli is here.
Sir, I'm here.
Shanyoli? Where are you? Yes.
Hello, yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Shanyoli. What is
Sir?
your feedback?
Actually, I have taught in one semester only in law. So through this session, actually I got knowledge that how can I assess my student and how to keep my students and give a better and provide a great knowledge and that's and how to evaluate them through this how to evaluate them and how to provide a great knowledge to the student. That's all, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Dr. Nupur, you would want to give some concluding remarks?
So I just wanted to thank both on behalf of the organizers. Thank one of the organizers, Professor Shantakumar and Dr. Puneet, for coming and giving this thing. I'm sorry about what happened last time, but I'm sure that this session was, this is like a really great exercise for most law teachers, and it's something that we've never thought about at all and think about. So it's really great to actually do this exercise, because not only do you benefit, but also the next generation of law students, professionals, everybody benefits from that. So thank you very much, sir. And I'm sure all of us would get a occasion to reflect on this. Also to Puneet and thanks also to the participants. My only request is that it's I know that there are technical problems and issues, but please try and switch on your cameras and also use the chat box to ask questions and participate, because otherwise, just like when you will be teaching to your students, it's not going to nothing. This can be a one-way traffic, a very passive exercise. You can come on chat box and say superb, wonderful. Many of you have been saying that, but unless we really know, can you, for example, can anybody tell me like which session has been really disastrous or which speaker has not really connected with you? We would like to know that, because this is also an experiment in progress. It's all of us can agree to be very polite to each other, but there is no learning that comes out of that. So, like, is there any session or you think anything? One of the things that came through the feedback earlier was that there were sessions which have too many speakers don't work because there is not enough time for discussion, and we really appreciate that. Is there any other thing that you would like to say about things that can be improved? Anything at all? And we've not heard from many people like Dr. Smita Pandey, for example,
I think Smita Pandey is not here.
Rana Roy, Devi Lalji, who keeps our spirits alive on the chat box, but has not spoken at all.
Yeah. they will all is a social media man.
Yeah, true. Yeah, Shruti, so you wanted to say something? Yes. What do you think has not worked? What thing can be done? Like that's.
We should ask them to come out with one point of improvement. Only one.
Exactly. One. That's good.
One thing, if you want to say that we need to improve on it, which is that one?
Yes.
Okay, let's start from Simi.
Yeah. I have raised it earlier also, but I think every session should have one exercise on that, like what we did right now. So then, we are all like that application when it happens, like the application happens, it not only works well with the student, but it also works well with the teachers also. Because then it retains, like it retains with you that what you have learned.
Okay.
Just
Okay,
everyone
Nikita.
just
Yes. Thank you, Shruti. Nikita.
Yes, sir. So what I want to say is a bit of extension of what Shruti ma'am already pointed out. So say we were discussing time and again that teaching environmental statute becomes a little boring. So if we could have sort of a demo lecture where we are students and somebody comes as a demo professor and tells us as to look, this is how I'm going to teach Water Act or the provisions. So that demonstration really helps and gives us a very practical idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, Moni, Dr. Moni. Yes.
Very good evening, sir. Due to bad weather here, I'm not able to get over there.
You are affected
Sir,
by
actually,
cyclone.
water area is out of electricity for past 2 days. Sir, actually, program is going very fine, and the sharing of PPT is good enough for the every participants over here. And regarding the earlier speaker has said, so we are keeping ourselves active in the group itself should be done. That will be fine. Some kind of activities that will be good. Yes.
Okay, so we have this gentleman I did not meet, Buddhaditya. I'm sorry,
Hello, Professor Shantakumar.
Yes.
No, I just wanted to say that we actually, I'm teacher at Ambedkar University, Delhi, and we actually use this Bloom's taxonomy to develop all our courses. So that was very helpful again to hear it from you. My only, I think, if you ask me about a suggestion for improvement, for example, today's session by Dr. Ghosh, who has a lot of experience in the sort of ministry and framing of laws. I thought he was, if you think of what he was saying in terms of Bloom's taxonomy, we would only, he didn't get a critical perspective. It was very sort of reading out of the National Environmental Policy or the PISA, of which we are familiar with. Somebody like his, I'm of course sharing this only because I've been asked to share one.
Absolutely.
But
it's an in-house thing. Yeah. We need to learn.
We would have expected more insights into the inner workings of things, what happens at the ministry, rather than things that are so that. But other than that, of course, this is very useful.
Right.
Yeah.
Jitin.
Yeah.
Jitin.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, Jitin. Yes.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, Jitin.
Yeah, the sessions were going, very well, and it actually gave a clear insight into, how the content delivery. For me, from my end, I'm saying, particularly this session, how effectively the content delivery has to go in terms of the clearly stated objectives. With respect to that, I've got a much more clarity from this session. And regarding the previous sessions also, as Nupur was saying, I've given that feedback with respect to the yesterday's session also. Whenever there are two speakers, the session was actually going in a well crafted manner. Means the content was clear and the discussion was actually very, very well maintained. But if there is more speakers and then the discussion goes in a sideline manner, or maybe the speakers may also not get adequate time period for the exact discussion. So I think that can be for a 90-minute session, 2 speakers and discussions would be fine. I think.
Right, fine, fantastic. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you so much. I think Dr. Nupur, we can conclude this session. It's almost 6:40. So we will conclude this session and we will meet again for session 11.
Yes,
We
session
are
11
coming
tomorrow.
session 11 tomorrow at 3 p.m. in the afternoon.
Yeah, and we will not fulfill your expectations at all because there are 6 speakers. Bear with us, please. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
All these suggestions for the next TTT.
Next TTT. You're like under clinical trial right now.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. Take care. Have a great evening.
Okay. So thank you so much and wish you all the best. Have a safe.
Thank you.